One of the most common questions I get is what's the difference between a planer and a drum sander? A lot of people wondering, hey, if I was only to get one, which would I get? A lot of you probably, maybe you know about the planer or you have a planer, you're thinking about getting a drum sander and you're wondering, is it worth that price tag? So today I'm just going to go through what are the capabilities and limitations of a planer, and then really what does a drum sander entail? Spoiler alert, it's amazing, it's incredible, it's worth the investment, but it's not a magical machine that's going to stop you from having to sand ever again. So in this video, I'm going to start with a planer. If you are already familiar with the planer, just go ahead and skip ahead, but just kind of show, what does it do, why it's so important as maybe, a step up once you have the table saw, an introductory woodworking tool, but then the drum sander, just, what are the unique capabilities of the drum sander. So hopefully this adds some light to some questions you've had, and it helps you out. So take a look. So first up, the planer. This is just going to be a quick overview. I'll show you it in action, show you its capabilities. If you want the full, lowdown on the different units, check out the tool company's videos. I'm sure there's plenty of tool reviews out there. But the planer, it's a great tool. You got your blades inside, and it just rotates and it surfaces the wood. So for rough cut lumber, surfacing, making it flat. You can throw sleds and different jigs in here to even use it as a jointer for wood that's not too wide. It's great for surfacing cutting boards and other laminations. Limitations, is width. This particular lunchbox style planer, it's about 12.5 inches. Really, it's more like 12 inches wide. The DeWalt other one, you can get about 13 inches. It is a fixed blade. You can upgrade at least the other DeWalt to the helical head. It's quite a few, dollars, shekels, to upgrade, but that produces a better finish. You can maybe do end grain boards with that style. Still don't recommend it. But really the planer, it's just great for quick surfacing. It's a blade as opposed to sandpaper, so it gets it nice and flat. So if you don't have either, I do recommend starting with the planer. It's what I started with. It opened up the world of cutting boards and just different laminations. It's a great tool to start with. Limitations. So width, we talked about snipe. So when you run a board through, doesn't matter how much you adjust the infeed and outfeed tables, you're always going to get a little snipe. So that's when the wood goes in and it kind of like tilts up and you get a little bit more removed, a little divot in the front and the back. And there's ways around that, some different tips, but that is, a concern with the planer. You don't get that as much with the drum sander. The other thing with the planer is not great for figured woods. So if you ever use quilted maple, curly maple, purple heart sometimes, it gets a lot of chip out. And so it just, it's pretty aggressive, even with shallow, depth. That blade can remove bigger chunks at a time, and the sandpaper is a little bit gentler. But again, that's just one limitation. So it's a great tool, highly recommend it. If you don't have either, spoiler alert, start with the planer. It's a great place to start. So that's the planer. Let's see in action what it can do.
So another name for a planer is a thicknesser. It's a thickness planer, and you're just changing the thickness of a board, and so you're just slowly removing material to get it to a uniform thickness. So it's used a lot in carpentry and a lot of applications, but here you see I'm just taking some old fence boards. So this is great for reclaimed wood if you want to breathe some new life into some old rustic pieces, and even though it looks really clean there, it adds a lot of character. So this is a great application if you got some old barn wood. Of course, with rough sawn hardwoods, that's a primary use for it. Here I just got a long piece of walnut. You sometimes will have to use a sled if the board is really cupped or bowed, but it just cleans up so nicely, and you just take a rough sawn piece like that board up on top, and you can clean it up, and then you can start your projects. But one of the best ways to use it, and my primary use for it, is flattening and surfacing boards. So after you've done a lamination, a glue up of cutting boards or serving boards, you have a lot of different boards at different heights. And even if you're really good on the glue up, it's not going to be perfectly flat. The planer just gives you a perfectly flat surface. You're going to rotate it back and forth. And there's some more steps to this, but The planer's primary use in my shop, at least, is for cutting boards. And you can see that pile as it comes there. You can see some glue squeeze out. You can see it's not, the prettiest, but after you run it through the planer a bunch of times, you get it to whatever thickness you want. And it just makes quick work of it. So the planer with that fixed blade, it really can surface it rather quickly. It's an amazing machine, really, really important tool in my shop. Here you can see just a little giddy when I first got mine. So it really is a fabulous option, but that's the planer for you.
All right, so the drum sander, this unit is amazing. And for me, I saved up like hardcore for a couple years. This particular unit, it's not cheap, 1,500 bucks. Other companies make ones a little bit cheaper, but definitely had wanted this for so many applications, and it is worth it. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it is not a magical machine that frees you of all sanding. There are some limitations I'll get to in a bit. But with this, I mean, basically it's just, you got a drum, you got sandpaper, and you just change it out for the different grits. There's a conveyor belt, you run the wood through. So just like with the planer, it will surface the wood, but it's sandpaper. So it's less aggressive than a blade. It's really good for figured wood. So we'll show in a bit just how you can see how it really takes care of the chip out on figured woods. Great tool, a great tool. It's also good for end grain boards. So if you are doing a cutting board with end grain, you really shouldn't send it through the planer. There's so many stories of it blowing up and breaking a planer. There's ways around it if you're careful, but it's just not worth the risk to yourself or to your machine. And so this, with it being sandpaper, it's just leveling it off over and over again. So great tool. A lot of applications in that it's open-ended, this particular unit. So this is a 1938. So I can do 19 inches here, or I can flip it 38 inches. So I can get a big panel. Really nice to have. I've used that a couple times. Awesome. But the limitation, it's not just, hey, I make a cutting board, I send it through, change the grit, send it through, change the grit. You still are going to take your random orbital just to remove those sanding lines. They do make ones that oscillate, which are helpful, but you're still going to see some sanding lines. So that's one thing I didn't quite realize when I purchased it. So just know that it's not going to free you of all sanding. It definitely helps though, and it really makes your glue ups more efficient, surfacing. So I'm going to walk you through just some of the applications in actual use to see why get a drum sander. Is it worth it? So just you have a better idea before you shell out that dough. So drum sander, let's check it out.
End grain cutting boards. So this was actually my primary motivation in getting the drum sander. It's just the safest way to flatten your end grain boards, like these brick boards here. It just works really well. It's safely. There's just some sketchy stuff that can go down if you use the planer. It makes it pretty easy. You are going to have to do a lot of passes depending on your grits, but end grain boards is definitely a great use for a drum sander. Talked earlier about figured wood. So there's some curly maple there where you get some pretty big chip out. So after this goes through the planer, curly maple and some other species of wood, it can get this tear out. So some pretty substantial chip out. This happens with purple heart as well. And so with the drum sander, it's less aggressive. You're just smoothing the surface, whereas the knife in a planer blade can cause that chip out. So here you can see it gets nice and smooth. So this is a great use of the drum sander with figured woods. This is just a wider board. So obviously you could have a bigger planer. I know a fair amount of folks have a 20-inch planer in their shops. For me, it just doesn't make sense to have a 20-inch planer and a drum sander. So I can do wider boards like this bigger cutting board or these big panels. So I've got some big Claro slabs here. These are close to 18 inches wide, and this is just too wide for my planer. After, I had a lot of void fills here with epoxy, some CA glue. I want to get it nice and flat before I did my glue up. And the drum sander, it's wide enough. So just having that wider surface is it's a nice luxury to have. So I don't have to get a 20-inch planer, although it'd be nice. The drum sander can handle that for me. The other reason why you really want it is the open end. So this one is that 1938. So if I start with 19 inches, I can flip it over. So I can get up to 38 inches wide on this glue up. And so that's just really nice, especially seen here where I have about, 6 different pieces there. I got a lot of different ridges from that glue up, and it's just a headache to try and surface that any other way. Here you can see I'm actually doing a belt change for the drum. It's pretty quick to change the sanding belts. It's not too bad at all. So you definitely can find whatever progression you want. I usually just leave 80 grit on my drum sander always for everything. But that open end is a really nice feature, and so that's another bonus for having the drum sander. Here I got a bunch of charcuterie boards. So normally I do all my void fills ahead of time, but sometimes there's just lots of little bug tracks and stuff that you have to keep filling. I've already cut the handles, so if I were to send these through the planer to try and flatten them out, I would probably lose a handle or two, because I've done that. So with the sandpaper in the drum sander, it's just way less aggressive. So if I'm going to do things out of order, I can send something that's a little bit more delicate, like, a thinner board like this with a nice decorative handle. So that's a great added bonus. This is probably my favorite application. I didn't realize how much I would love the drum sander for this. I talked about this a lot in my cutting board 101 video. When you're doing cutting boards with those little thin rips, so these are all like 3/16 of an inch thick, you really don't want to send it through the planer. Whereas here, I can send these through the drum sander, get super thin, paper thin little rips, and it helps for a glue up, making sure I got a good glue up on the cutting board. Okay, so right here, this is something that you see a lot of people post on online, on social media. I've done it. I don't have the in-feed table like a lot of people do, where you just kind of drop it and it looks like, oh, it just auto-feed. It's amazing. And yes, this looks really cool, and you can do this. It does work. However, I feel like this is misleading. So I do want to make sure that people know, if you get a drum sander, it adds lines. There are sanding lines. So you still are going to have to go back and use a random orbital sander. Like I said earlier, I just ended up leaving 80 grit on my drum all the time. Sometimes I'll switch it out, but really if you get a drum sander, you're still going to have to do some sanding. So just be aware of that. It's not going to take away all of your sanding. But with a good sander, you can make quick work of it. It's not a big deal at all. But the drum sander is amazing. Had to throw in these, awesome shots because I was so happy. It's an investment. It's a lot of money, but it is a great tool. So there's the drum sander for you.
All right, planer or thicknesser versus the drum sander. Verdict is, well, if you're only going to get one, I would go with the planer, right? Like I said earlier, it is a great tool. You can throw all kinds of things through this machine, and it really does awesome stuff. And, price point, much less than a drum sander. The goal of this video is really just to show the differences between the two and maybe give a better idea. Like, it felt like an infomercial there at the end of the drum sander. Just giving you an idea, what can it do? Why is it this tool that woodworkers seem to be clamoring for? In my opinion, it was worth the investment. I'm about a year in with this machine, and I still love it and still use it regularly. But if this was helpful at all, please consider subscribing. Normally we have all sorts of projects, so you'll see all kinds of different builds, a good variety, but consider subscribing to see more, just like so. Again, hope this helped. It was not comprehensive, I get that. And so, but just, from my experience and my knowledge, the differences between the machines, and hopefully helps you before you make your purchase and you're a little bit better informed. But thanks everyone, take care.